Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamie Bays. I'm the program director here at Rachel's Network, and I'm zooming in from the ancestral lands of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people, currently known as Washington, D.C. I am pleased to welcome you all to our webinar, Women Leaders Fighting the High Cost of Climate Change. For those of you who are new to Rachel's Network, we are a community of women environmental funders and leaders at the intersection of environmental advocacy, philanthropy, and leadership. Today's program is co-sponsored by our sister organization, Rachel's Action Network, or RAN. RAN empowers women to influence the political process and supports women environmental champions running for office. RAN endorses candidates who champion policy priorities, publishes a report on women's environmental leadership, and hosts educational events for members with women policy leaders. Before our speakers are introduced today, I'd like to review some Zoom housekeeping tips. Please mute yourself and use the chat box to ask questions or make technical inquiries. We encourage you to keep your camera on so the speakers can see your faces and feel more of a community gathering. Speakers will be spotlighted during this presentation and should be most visible to you on your screen. If this isn't true, please select Speaker View. Please feel invited to update your Zoom screen name with your pronouns, as I have done, and introduce yourself to the group in the chat. And just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded. I'm now going to pass the mic to Fern Shepard, Rachel's Network President.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm honored to moderate this conversation with three women leaders working hard every day to make progress on one of the most challenging issues of our time. I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then we're going to jump into the conversation. So in alphabetical order, I'm pleased to introduce Lauren Blackford. Many of you may know that Lauren was recently appointed the executive director of the Sierra Club, the first female executive director in that organization's 134-year history. So it's about time. Lauren has been a Sierra Club leader for nearly 2 decades, both as a volunteer and a staff member. She's a member of Rachel's Network. She serves on the board of Ceres, the Blue Green Alliance, and Rachel's Action Network. Welcome, Lauren. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Lena Moffett. Lena is the Executive Director of Evergreen Action, an organization dedicated to enacting policies to defeat the climate crisis while making people's lives better. Evergreen is building an actionable policy roadmap that America needs to tackle climate change while also creating good-paying jobs, lowering energy bills, and promoting a more just and thriving clean energy future. Welcome, Lena.
Thanks so much for having me. Hi, Ferd.
Hi there. And our third speaker today is Candace Youngblood. She is both a senior attorney at Earth Justice and the founder of Youth en Route, which empowers frontline youth in California to advocate for their communities through an environmental justice leadership program. At Earth Justice, Candace represents communities that support the adoption of zero-emission technologies, particularly in freight-impacted communities, with the goal of both improving air quality and fostering a just transition away from fossil fuels. Candace was also a 2025 recipient of the Rachel's Network Catalyst Award. She was selected with 5 other women leaders by her peers from over 200 applicants. And you can read more about that award and other impressive recipients on our Rachel's Network website. Welcome, Candace.
Thanks, Fern.
Okay, let's get our conversation started. So this first question is to all of you, both to really help our listeners better understand your background and your current work. So how did you come to your work? And what is your big focus right now? And Candace, would you lead us off? And then Lauren, and then Lena.
Yeah, happily. So hi, everyone. I'm Candace Youngblood. I was born and raised in Southern California, which is notorious for many things, including our traffic and our smog problem. I grew up with asthma, and respiratory illness really ran through my family and my community. And I didn't really think about this critically until I went away to college and I took an environmental health class. And the professor explained that Black children were twice as likely as white children to have asthma. And to illustrate this health disparity, she used Southern California as the case study. And so I was very much the subject of this lecture. And that's when I learned about environmental justice and when I became really passionate about it. When I graduated from college, I was interested in maybe going to law school. And so my first job after college was at Earth Justice in our newly opened LA office. And there I got to work on clean air issues, serve the community that I grew up in, and also see a really powerful model for what true community lawyering looks like. And so I wanted to be them when I grew up. So that led me to law school, which affirmed that I wanted to practice law at Earth Justice. And so I've been back as an attorney for about 5 years now. And the thing I'm really working on here, I'm part of a campaign called Right to Zero, which is a state-by-state effort to clean up our air by electrifying everything. That's transportation, industry, our buildings, and to power it all with a clean energy grid. As Fern mentioned, I also started a nonprofit during the pandemic called Youth en Route. And so Youth en Route provides wraparound support to youth who grew up in communities like mine. I really wanted to give youth like me the opportunity that I didn't have at the time, which is to be part of the environmental justice movement and to know that I was an expert in the issues that I was living on the front lines of.
That's awesome. Here. Hey everyone, so good to see a lot of familiar faces here. Great to be here with you. Yeah, I grew up hiking, camping, canoeing. My parents were sort of taking me out in the woods on backpacking trips before I could walk. I think we spent one whole summer out in nature with like no power or water when I was really little. So it was kind of what I was raised with. And then when I was maybe 10, my dad was teaching at Wesleyan, and a friend of his was a physics professor and decided they were going to build a solar house. Students were going to build a solar house, which is a 10-year-old like sounded, that makes sense. They're grown-ups. Now I think of college students building a house with new, we were probably one of the first solar houses in Connecticut with new technology. So it didn't work supremely well, but it was very inspiring. These students were so passionate about the clean energy. It was not long after the energy crisis had happened, and also just taking care of nature, of the stream and the woods, and we had goats in the backyard, and it was a whole experience. Um, but cold. I think those college students are like a lot of my inspiration, and also part of why to this day I think we really need to be engaging with the college students because they inspire a lot of people and do a lot of great work. Um, After in college, I focused on international development issues and thought I'd want to focus on that. And so after college, I got an internship with the Quaker UN office, and it was just in the lead up to the first Earth Summit. And that was an amazing experience because like as Quake, they would do in a true Quaker style, they would do these like preparatory off the record meetings where they'd bring together like key delegates from US and other developed countries and the G77, which is a group of developing countries and outside experts, and have these like off the record, really candid conversations. Incredible learning experience. And then I went to work with the UN Non-Governmental Liaison Service going into the first Rio Earth Summit. And so we were supporting groups, NGOs, particularly from developing countries, in participating. And we were doing an evaluation of the NGO negotiations, which I'll say were much better than the governmental negotiations in Rio. But it really brought home to me something that has really shaped sort of how I've thought about this work ever since, which was the conversations between groups like Third World Network, groups that were focused on economic development and the realities of people's lives, particularly in developing countries. Um, and then the big green groups from the North who we're a little overly focused on protecting places and animals and not necessarily fully thinking about people. And that's certainly something that big green groups grapple with to this day. I feel like we've made some progress and have a lot more to do. After graduate school, I focused on economic development in the U.S., community development, and so I worked at a big intermediary that supported community-based work, revitalizing low-income communities, and eventually that focused on an environmental agenda within that work. So green jobs, transportation-oriented development, sustainable housing that was affordable housing. And that also really shaped my focus on how do you support and empower local communities, but in a way that scales and has national impact. So those were kind of my formative things. Rachel's network has also been very formative for me. I'm really grateful to be part of this community of amazing women leaders. Like it's been quite a few years now, and it's meant a lot and I've learned a lot from this community and really appreciate that. And have learned a lot in my many years at the Sierra Club now. And then it's a whole different matter actually being in the executive director seat. And I'm grateful to this community, particularly in some of the hard moments of that. So thank you. Um, Turn it over to Lena.
Well, it's always hard to follow Lauren, but I will say I have also learned a lot from Lauren. So it's sort of fitting here that I'm after her. I was lucky enough to spend a decade of my career at the Sierra Club, and Lauren's talking about learning things from this community. And I have learned so much from both my time at the Sierra Club, but specifically from you, Lauren. So it's wonderful to be in conversation with you. So thank you for having me. I grew up in New Mexico, and I am the daughter of a retired teacher and construction worker, and my working class parents took us camping for every vacation we had. I spent so much time outside in the beautiful landscapes of New Mexico and largely near the Jemez Pueblo in New Mexico. And I just was very impressed, I think, into my DNA, the beauty of our natural world and the joy of being outside, and was lucky enough to have two parents that also taught me that it was my responsibility to use my smarts and my wherewithal, that if I saw something wrong in the world, I had to do something about it. I had to try. One of my earliest memories was looking up at my mom's hand at this. Folks here probably remember the Hands Across America protest in like the early 80s, I think, and protesting and activism and using our voice to, stand up for our community, to fight poverty, to fight injustices was just part of my childhood, my growing up, and was very lucky to have parents who instilled that in me and supported me in pursuing a career to try and make the world a better place. And combining my love of the outdoor world, my passion for justice, and my wherewithal in helping people use their voice, I was lucky enough to become a professional advocate. And spending a decade at the Sierra Club, I sure did learn a lot. And I cut my teeth on the Keystone XL campaign, where I got to help fight that pipeline for the better part of a decade. But in so doing, working with frontline communities and leaders from across the country to really speak truth to power in a way that showed me what we can do when we stand up together. And that fight, and so many of them are ongoing, but it is such a joyous privilege to get to do this for a job. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. We are so fortunate to have this wealth of experience and different perspectives for this conversation. So let me now get into what I'm going to do is ask questions individually to each of you, but I hope that all three of you will weigh in with thoughts. Feel free to disagree or agree, but add your own perspective on each one of these. So here we go. This one's to you, Lena. What does climate change have to do with the high price Americans are seeing in living expenses? And how might the environmental community better communicate that connection?
Yeah, well, so much. It's such a good question. I think it's the question to be asking right now. As climate advocates, I think we are smart to talk about how climate change is expensive, and it is making things more expensive in every meaning of the word. Affordability has become the tagline of the day. We saw prices play out as one of the most important issues in the election this past November. And our policies have a lot to offer when it comes to cutting not just pollution, but also costs. And so I would say it's twofold. We absolutely need to talk about how climate change is expensive and extreme weather is increasing costs from everything from home insurance to natural disasters to driving inflation and supply chain breakdown. But we also have the solutions at hand. Clean energy is cheap energy. Energy prices specifically were rated as the second highest concern for voters in the election in November. And hey, we have one of the best solutions out there. And particularly in what is admittedly a hard political environment, we have to make sure that decision makers understand that they can and must continue driving climate solutions right now because they're also going to help cut costs. So we are really shifting a lot of our focus at Evergreen to lead with that, communicating about how both climate change is a driver and the policies that will address climate change can also address high costs. Clean energy is cheap energy, and we just have to keep hammering that home with decision makers.
Lauren or Candace, anything you want to add to that?
Just so true. And to really bring it home to the specifics, because now sort of affordability has become almost like a buzzword. The right co-opts that some and says like affordability, well, we have to like drill more to have affordability, and we know that's not true. So we need to also combat the disinformation, but give the specifics of this. It's not just a sort of omnibus affordability. And I'll say here in New York State, like we're seeing it in a big way. We're seeing utility bills just skyrocket. It really is hitting people hard. And to communicate just what Lena was saying, like we do have the solutions. It doesn't have to be this way, and connect it to those specific decisions, whether it's shutting down offshore wind projects that are almost complete, that are going to hit the pocketbooks of ratepayers, or if it's the impact of data centers. And so the communications is a huge part of this and helping folks sort of understand what's really going on and parse through all of the misinformation.
Okay. Candace, this one goes to you. You've been working for years on supporting a transition for school and city buses for the freight industry in California to cleaner fuels. And while many Americans right now are rightly upset about the high prices of gas, and it certainly is raising the salience of this affordability issue and the connection to fossil fuels, there are a host of other costs that are associated with our transportation system and sector that we pay indirectly. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah. So just to reiterate what was just said, I think that what this moment, as these gas prices are surging, what this moment more than ever proves is that clean energy is the affordable and stable way forward, right? Clean energy is also going to directly protect our health, which by extension also protects our pocketbooks. So transportation is the leading driver of smog-forming pollutants like nitrous oxides. And that causes, ozone causes breathing problems, heart problems, cancer, reproductive issues, early death. And so you can really quantify these health impacts as hospital admissions, emergency room visits, school absences, lost work days, the cost of medication, right? So all of those things are directly costing us. And then transportation pollution is also indirectly costing us because it's the largest driver of greenhouse gas emissions. As of December, the US has experienced over 400 climate disasters that have cost us $1 billion or more. And the total cost of all of that exceeds $3.1 trillion. Wildfires in LA, the hailstorms in Texas, the drought in the Southwest, all of that totaled at least $115 billion. And we pay for that damage, right? Research is finding that homeowners' insurance costs are already $350 a year higher because of climate impacts, and that they're likely to keep rising in the years ahead. And so in this moment, federal inaction on climate change is costing us. Take, for example, the repeal of the endangerment finding, EPA's 2009 finding that climate pollution is a threat to our public health and welfare and therefore needs to be regulated under the Clean Air Act. And so, that was just illegally repealed this month or within the last month. And that finding was the basis of safeguards that are going to cut pollution from cars and trucks. And so by repealing that, EPA has also pulled those clean vehicle standards from the books, right? Standards that would save us healthcare costs and save us money on gas. The Trump administration's own analysis concluded that repealing these protections will increase fuel prices by 25 cents per gallon in 2035 and 76 cents per gallon in 2050. And so Americans are going to be forced to spend as much as 1.7 trillion more on fuel. And all of that analysis was done before gas prices skyrocketed. So in all of these ways, right, transportation is costing us.
Lauren and Lena, anything you want to add to that? Thank you, Candace. That was depressing.
I do think so much of it is also about that emotional tenor that we're touching on here too, that, it is costing us, and the numbers are so clearly there. It's costing us in ways that I think folks don't even necessarily connect the dots on. And it's incumbent on us to connect the dots, but also reflect that we understand these are systemic issues too, that all of these things are connected. And I think what we're seeing with candidates who are winning on affordability is, in my view, is almost less about the details of what they're talking about and more about the emotional posture that they are taking, that they are willing to fight for people, that obviously something in this system isn't working for the vast majority of people. It's working for a very small handful of super rich, largely white men, but it's not working for most of us. And high energy prices is one symptom of that. And I think it gives us an in to start talking about our issues as an entry point for climate policies. But we also need to showcase that these are intersecting, larger systemic issues that leaders are going to fight to push back on. And I think as we're seeing now, I hope that the tides are turning. I think that folks are starting to see that Trump isn't fighting for them, that the leaders who are pushing fossil fuels as the affordability solution are not fighting for them. They are clearly fighting to enrich themselves, and it is taking a toll on all of us. And we're going to be back in a situation, I hope, post-November, where our side can go on offense and be pushing those kinds of systemic solutions as well. Yes, clean energy is part of that, but holistic changes that will better touch on solutions to all the challenges that Candace just talked about too. Healthcare, housing, transportation, energy, that it's all connected to these holistic solutions that we also need to be pushing with emotional vigor, that we're going to fight for people and that we're going to stand up for them.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Lena. Thank you. To you, Lauren, because Sierra Club chapters around the country endorse candidates. We've got a midterm election coming up. We've got primaries even before that. I'm curious which races the club is watching. And do you see candidates who are successfully linking and communicating about the way in which our dependency on fossil fuels is having both direct and indirect costs on all of our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hoping that Zoom is doing a good job at blocking the drilling that's happening by or cutting our street. Okay, awesome. They're replacing a gas pipeline because it was leaking into the houses of my neighbors' houses. So there you go. Another reason we need to shift off of fossil fuels. So yeah, Sierra Club is very involved with politics, and that's we do the litigation, we do the outings, we do the advocacy, but the main Sierra Club is a C4 organization. We have a national PAC, we have a whole bunch of state level PACs, and so our chapters are deeply engaged in politics and endorsing in races across the country. And it is where we see a lot of our power and effectiveness, and particularly because we have long-term relationships. And so, we'll get involved with folks sometimes the first time they run for office, or maybe city council, or like a public utility commission. Like, we get into the really wonky races too, that are super important in the decision making on these issues. But then often we'll be in relationship with those politicians all the way up for when they run for state office or federal office. Um, and and we can sort of engage when things are tough at the federal level. We're engaging even more at the state level. So we have chapters in every state in the country. We have 64 chapters, so a lot in California, where we started. And they're engaged in, again, federal, state, and local. We're working in every state house. Um, and there are certainly particular races, like as we go into the 26 midterms, we are focusing, actually, where Rachel's network is about to go, Michigan is a top focus for us. And then we're also looking at like North Carolina, California, Virginia, active. And often we're picking the places we focus on for a variety of different reasons. It's sometimes where we know there's some critical environmental issues at play. And so, for example, in the last round at the state level, we were looking, at Virginia, because we know there's like a lot of data center work going there. And which states do we make sure we need to have good political leaders that are going to set a framework for how a build out, since Virginia has the biggest build out, I believe the rules that are set there are going to make a big difference, not only in that place, but as a model for others. We also, we have a permanent organizing presence in every state, and we have staff, and we have lots of volunteers. We have 3.5 million members and supporters across the country, and a lot of those folks can focus on, particular campaigns, shutting down coal plants, replacing them with clean energy, but they can also move into knocking on doors, sort of as time calls for it. I will say that often the more specific races can be really impactful. And so again, I mentioned public utility councils, water boards. I mean, they're really, really local races that don't necessarily get a lot of attention, that have a huge impact. And I'll just like name one that was a recent victory that I was particularly excited about, was the Arizona Salt River Project. And our Grand Canyon chapter, which is led by one of our like really, Sandy Barr, one of our iconic women leaders, helped secure an 8-6 clean energy majority on the board of the Salt River Project, which is a public utility that serves over 1 million electric customers in the Phoenix metro area. That race was targeted by Turning Point USA, and probably most people have heard of them, but it's a far right group that has a lot of attention, has a lot of leverage, and there's sort of a feeling on the left of like, we're not organizing as well as they were, but they came in favor of the non-clean energy folks, and lost very decisively. And it's okay to quote here, the Phoenix New Times that ran a headline, Turning Point gets its ass handed to it in the SRP elections. So, not our words, but we got coverage in the New York Times for the work there. And it's just something, and what's noteworthy there was like, only property owners got to vote in that election, and it's in a very conservative district. So to the point of like, these issues, particularly when everybody cares so much about affordability, can really resonate like across political lines. So that victory to me just shows like what our movement can do. I know folks are also have probably heard some about like the Georgia Public Utility Commission race. We're seeing results from that already, getting some good, strong, clean energy folks they are running on these issues we're talking about, clean energy, affordability, and we're seeing those people win. And that was a game changer. I mean, we had to sort of intervene to overturn some stuff they tried to slip in before the new commissioners were seated. but we're seeing really some great results on those sorts of races. And so, yeah, we see candidates running now on pollution and health and lowering bills and insurance, climate disasters, driving skyrocketing insurance. And voters, like they get when that gets laid out, I do think we're seeing some transition where there had been a lot of traction where environmentalists and environmental issues were sort of pegged for a long time as being elite and being just a thing that, rich people cared about and that we're about polar bears. And like, yes, we care about polar bears, but I think it is really important that we are now bringing home, and good candidates are really bringing this home, that this is every day. This is people's health. This is, like Candace was speaking to, this is kids with asthma. This is people, and then particularly when people's health care has been cut so deeply. These are really core pocketbook issues, health issues, jobs issues. I mean, clean energy is now providing many more jobs than fossil fuels as well. And I think folks are making that connection, and we're seeing successful candidates that are helping folks make those connections.
And I would just quickly add to that the 36 governor's races that are happening next year. I'm sorry, this year. We're already well into 2026. Last year, I think we saw the two governor's races that Lauren touched on really showcase how our issue can take center stage. And Governor Sherrill in New Jersey in particular really showed that leaning into energy prices and showing that she is going to fight for her constituents to lower costs and do so through a clean energy affordability agenda can be a winner. We were really proud to help advise her campaign and then be working with her transition team and on the policies that they're pursuing now, where it's all three levels of state authority. You've got the executive, you've got the legislature, and the subnational regulatory bodies. With her, it's the Board of Public Utilities. The details of how to advance clean energy more expeditiously moving forward there, and it really paid dividends for her. I think that was key to her decisive victory in November, and we've got to do that in as many of these gubernatorial races coming up this year as we possibly can. That includes places like Michigan, incumbents in Pennsylvania, incumbents in New York. We need to be in there pushing that clean energy is a solution, not the problem here.
Definitely. And for those of you who are going to Rachel's Network's gathering in Michigan, we're very excited about Jocelyn Benson running the presumable Democratic nominee for governor there. So connected with Rachel's Network folks. So I'm very sorry not to be there, but she's going to be there speaking to folks, and definitely one of the candidates that we're excited about. And I think what Lena just named is really important too, to have these ongoing relationships with folks, because it's not just about getting people in office, it's continuing to influence and hold accountable. Like even our friends, being able to hold folks accountable to be the best that we can be is really important. And having those relationships at the state level, being on the transition committees, et cetera, is a big part of how I think we collectively have influence. So definitely a big part of how we're approaching the work.
I wanted to respond to the point you made, Lauren, about folks seeing these issues as elitist, right? There was some polling or message testing from New York that was done. And what we were seeing from that is that folks like overwhelmingly, they are concerned about climate change, but that for many of them, it was deprioritized because these issues of affordability are more pressing to them, right? And I think that, as you said, it's like making the connection between one, air quality impacts and climate change not being the same thing, right? There's a lot of overlap there, but like that these sources of pollution result in climate pollution and these like toxic air emissions that are directly impacting your healthcare costs today. I think making that connection is really important. And I think that, it's just, an unfortunate truth that as environmentalists, we're not always going to be seen as the credible messengers on these issues. And so finding credible messengers to like partner with to help like elevate these issues, I think is critical. And I think that that is sort of the important role that a lot of these folks who are running for office that you named are playing in this moment.
Those are really good points, Candace. And I kind of want to pick up on one thing that I think you were alluding to around. So we are seeing candidates and the whole community using this linkage with affordability, and in part because everything has gotten so unaffordable. And it's a great frame to talk about clean energy being cheaper energy. I'm wondering though, just let's have the honest conversation here. Are there pitfalls to that framing? If we tie it too much to cost and affordability, is there a pitfall to that? Are we, for example, missing the need to attend to some of our dependency on fossil fuels for other reasons as well? So, Candace, let me throw that back to you, if you don't mind, and of course, Lena and Lauren, feel free to jump in too.
Yeah. I mean, these affordability, like this narrative around affordability is really resonating with the folks that I work with. A lot of our clients and partners are representing low-income communities, communities of color, and also because I work with youth as well, they're coming up in a moment where it's such a bad economic market. Like it was hard for me to get my first job out of college, and I can't even imagine how hard it is right now. And so they're overwhelmed by these issues, right? I think that some of the pitfalls, this goes back to, I think, maybe what Lauren had said earlier, is about when industry is talking about affordability. Our communities are asking the question, like, affordability for who? Right? Because industry is not talking about the high costs of public health impacts, right? And right now we're seeing that the federal government is deliberately ignoring climate costs to the benefit of industry, the fossil fuel industry, and at our expense. And so, sort of going back to the endangerment finding, right? When an agency does rulemaking, they have to support their decision with facts, right? Otherwise, it's arbitrary and capricious and in violation of the law. When they propose to rescind the endangerment finding and these vehicle standards that are attached to it that curb pollution from vehicles, EPA said that they could not monetize the health benefits of those standards, right? Even though they had accounted for these benefits when they adopted these standards. I think that for the 2024 GHG standard for cars, some of the health benefits that were estimated from all of these standards were $13 billion a year in avoided healthcare costs between 2026 and 2055, according to EPA's analysis. And so we're seeing that the federal administration is skewing analysis to the benefit of industry and at our expense, right? And so, yeah, folks are really concerned about this. And I think that, yeah, it is resonating with them. And that's why they're fighting back. Earth Justice and a big coalition of other health and environmental groups are, suing the administration for their repeal of the endangerment finding, representing community groups in Southern California and Laredo, Texas. So some of these communities that are low income, right, and are really dealing with this affordability crisis. I know that earlier you mentioned that what I had shared was depressing, and so I wanted to leave this one with an optimistic note. I wanted to share a story about youth who are also fighting back against inaction on climate change. So in Hawaii, Earth Justice represented 14 youth plaintiffs who sued their state Department of Transportation to spur climate action because they were saying that, the climate crisis threatens their land, their food, their cultural practices like fishing. And so right before they went to trial in 2024, the governor and the director of the Department of Transportation and the plaintiffs ended up entering into this historic groundbreaking settlement agreement that recognized the youth's constitutional right to a life-sustaining climate. And the State Department of Transportation committed to planning and implementing transformative changes that are going to bring up to date Hawaii's transportation system, right, which relies a lot on importing these expensive fossil fuels. And so, that's a model that we can maybe replicate in other states, and I think is a really positive example of youth fighting for this future, right? Like they inherited this problem of not being able to afford anything, and they're fighting for their future, and in that situation, they won.
That's so inspiring, Candace. Thank you for sharing that story. Hawaii leading the charge. I will just quickly add two thoughts. I'm sure you all probably read Bill McKibben's latest post where he implored us to not lose climate change from our messaging. And I will say I cannot agree more. I mean, I pretty much always agree with Bill. He's one of my mentors and friends, but that piece in particular really spoke to me, even as someone who we have really doubled down on affordability. I see it as a really important in, like we've talked about, and Candace is rightly saying it's resonating with folks. And also, we can't stop talking about climate change. I loved that he quoted Senator Whitehouse in that piece where I think Whitehouse called it the leadership loss cycle, where if we as professional advocates aren't talking about climate change and we're not talking about it when we talk to leaders and decision makers in private settings, of course they're not going to talk about climate change. And so it's imperative on us as those who understand we have to keep fighting this fight to talk specifically to decision makers about climate change. I think we have to do that. And in all the ways we just laid out, we can do it through the affordability frame. Climate change is expensive. There are justice implications. All of the ways that we can talk about it, we have to. And then the second thing that does admittedly give me some pause, Dave Roberts talks about this on his podcast a lot, the worry of not delivering. As we talk about high costs and we talk about solutions, we have to make sure, as Lauren said, that we are specific and arming decision makers with the specific steps they can take to truly deliver. And on that front, I will add some wonky specifics here, but I think we need to be pushing specifically on clean energy decision makers to adopt essentially a twofold playbook, just like Governor Sherrill did. We have to be looking at near-term economic relief, and this largely takes emissions out of it. We need to hand people money. They need ratepayer relief right now. I'm a Pepco ratepayer, and I think our gas bill it's crazy. So we need near-term economic relief, and we need a whole suite of longer-term systemic reforms that are going to usher in clean energy, upgrade our grid, and transition us to that low-cost system that will actually keep both costs and pollution down over the long haul. So near term, it's that ratepayer relief. Longer term, those systemic reforms, we think, fall into three big buckets that need to be tailored by state. First, it's action on data centers. Lots of chat about that in the chat and everywhere. But when our modeling is showing that one of the fastest and most effective ways that we can save consumers money is by requiring data centers to both pay for their own grid upgrades and bring their own clean power. And that can happen quickly. States have authority to do that. State regulators have authority to do that. They've got to do that. So it's action on data centers. It's siting and permitting reforms to allow us to build clean energy really quickly. A lot of clean energy is getting hung up at the local and state level because of siting and permitting laws that are being weaponized against us, against landowners, keeping them from building solar farms on their own property. That has to stop. And that's largely at the state and local level. And then third, it's longer term utility regulatory reforms that need to happen. Utility regulations right now are basically anathema to building clean energy and deploying energy efficiency at the way that we need to. It's called the cost of service model right now, where they are incentivized to spend more, because the more they spend, the more they make. And that has largely meant laying pipelines and building gas plants. And that cannot be the rule of the day any longer. And it was really cool to see Governor Sherrill say that in her executive orders. We're going to look at these long-term business model reforms for utilities that will actually redo the way we regulate our utilities to incentivize them to act better by deploying clean energy and energy efficiency specifically. So those three things, data centers, siting and permitting, and utility business model reforms, we think will actually help us deliver. And then our leaders will actually be able to show folks that they meant business when they said they're going to cut costs. Sorry to wonk out the wonky details.
No, it's helpful because literally my next question was, are there model policies in any
Yes.
of these spheres, housing,
Yeah.
energy, transportation, that healthcare, that any of you would want to point us to.
Yeah.
And so, Lauren, Candace, if you have others that you want to add, especially specific places that seem to be, as Lena did with New Jersey, places where we've got leadership that is looking in the right direction. And Candace also raised the Hawaii situation where clearly they're taking some steps. Are there others that we should be aware of?
Absolutely. Before sharing some of that, just quickly, like 100% on what Candace and Lena were both saying. The question on the affordability of like for whom is such a big deal because what we see happening now is a federal administration that's putting its thumb on the scale in favor of fossil fuel companies. And so it's affordability for them and keeping dirty energy in place at the harm of ratepayers. And the endangerment finding is such a big deal because it's so consistent with what we're seeing across so many issues, whether it is what's happening in our communities, it's not caring about our lives. And so to make a decision where you zero out the value of human life and you're only looking at the cost of implementation by fossil fuel companies from our Environmental Protection Agency is insane. I mean, if you just like sit with that for a moment and you think of how consistent that is with other decisions they've made about healthcare, about detention, about just how people are being treated in this country, it just sort of brings us back to like these aren't just like abstract policy matters. Like there's a deep fundamental thing. And yes, the affordability matters as part of that. But it goes so far beyond that. And I do, again, like I do think people are catching on. We had spoken with um leader Hakeem Jeffries, who we are hoping will be a leader of the House. And, in an early conversation, there was sort of concern about, climate, we just need to talk about healthcare and affordability and maybe not climate. And what Lena named is so important. Like we can't let go of climate. There are plenty of pundits out there saying, oh, environmental groups are, they're too much just into climate. They don't care about human issues. And in that first conversation, there was that sort of like, nobody can say the word climate. We need to just like talk about the other issues without making those connections. But then in our most recent conversation, there was a recognition of that and about how climate and affordability together had to be like part of HR 1 to 10, the first legislation to come out. And so we're hoping that like we stick with that. But it's really on all of us to keep that salient. And yes, in terms of like examples, so often the examples come up from the states, and then that's what's picked up at the federal level. We really need to be looking at like what is it going to look like when we retake power federally, and the state examples will drive a lot of that. And some of those we've seen some great examples like from Illinois. They have, I think, I mean, I come from New York. I'm proud of what we had done, and now we have a little bit of. It's not all we would wish it would be. So I have to like hats off to Illinois for their Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. So Governor Pritzker signed it into law. It establishes the state's first battery storage standard, stronger renewable targets, and has new equity provisions. And so we've worked with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition on that win. And I think it's a great model where it designates lower costs, but that serve communities equitably. Vermont was the first state to pass Make Polluters Pay legislation. I think that's a movement we're seeing picked up elsewhere. That's a really big deal. And making that distinction that Candace was making about affordability for who. And so I think that kind of legislation is a template for a lot of places. And then, of course, there's some good examples on the insurance and disaster cost angles that make that link and start talking more about climate risk mitigation, which is an area I think all of us need to be gravitating more toward and looking at savings costs. I know there's some robust conversation going on in Florida and other places. So I know others have lots of examples, but those are just some that come to mind.
I can uplift two from California. One is around clean energy transparency. So last year in California, Earth Justice sponsored a bill that passed, which was called the California Ratepayer Protection Act. And so this is going to help provide relief for Californians, who are seeing our utility bills skyrocketing, right? This bill arose from one of my colleagues doing a lot of investigations into monopoly utilities using ratepayer funds to keep us locked into a fossil fuel past, right? So there was reporting that SoCal Gas had tried to pass $36 million onto customers for a years long campaign lobbying against clean air and climate measures. And PG&E similarly was discovered to they had attempted to use $6 million in wildfire funds paid for by customers to run TV ads to rehabilitate their corporate image. And so when this bill passed, California became the 7th state to prevent for-profit utilities from forcing customers to foot the bill for lobbying and promotional advertising costs to keep us locked into that polluting past. And a similar bill had passed in Connecticut, and I think some analysis on that bill had showed that that bill has already saved Connecticut residents from paying $10 million in utility expenses. This session, Earth Justice is co-sponsoring a bill called the Home Energy Choice Act, which is going to give Californians the option to electrify their homes with money that would otherwise be spent on old gas service lines. So every year, the utilities in California, they replace tens of thousands of gas service lines, and typically that costs over $20,000 each. And so this incentive program is going to give folks the options to electrify instead. And so it'll offer financial support to bring their homes energy efficient appliances like heat pumps, induction ovens, and I think there's a similar program that currently exists in New York as well.
Excellent. Those are all really helpful. And I know I want to make sure everyone is aware that I'm about to wrap up the questions that I have. We are going to take questions from all of you if you have them, and I know we're seeing some already in the chat. If you have a question, please put it into the chat and we'll do our best to go through as many of those as we can. So I want to at least have an opportunity. We've got three very important leaders in front of us right now, all of whom are working hard every single day to make a difference in all of our lives. And I would like to ask, when you're in this room, funders and other advocates, to each of you, where can funders and advocates right now direct their resources, their funds, their time, their energy? And this is more broad than just the election, but certainly we've got an upcoming election. Are there places where you would like to see us in particular focus and fund, thinking about at least the rest of this calendar year, and feel free to go beyond. So I'm going to start with you, Lauren, and then we'll go to Lena and then Candace.
Sorry. Yeah, definitely. So for me, a top one is the grassroots organizing capacity. And thank you, Lena, for making a great introduction for us for that good conversation with Dave Turk. This is an area that I feel like we're at a time where everybody's talking about how important it is, and often we hear how we're organized by the right, by Turning Point USA and others. But that's only just starting to connect with people willing to fund that. That's the grassroots. It's so many funders are looking for the specific outcomes. And that organizing work is often like long term. Certainly it can be around outcomes and, your key performance indicators, but so much of what's important is that like long term power building, grassroots organizing. And I think it is like we are in a movement moment right now. Like this is like the 60s or what? Like this is and we're in this, I think, big battle about like who's most successful with that. Um, it's a lot of what we're focusing on, taking sort of the best of what we've seen in organizing our movement over the past 100+ years, and then how do we connect that to what it needs to look like in this moment, how we use technology, how we engage with younger organizers. So I think that to me is a really big one. Legal defense is obviously that is where we are having a lot of successes right now. And that's been a really important backstop. So, we're having, Candace mentioned several important cases. We're doing a lot, often with Earth Justice. And that's shut down a lot of things that have been very problematic. They've also let us defend like the Endangered Species Act. And like we're at a moment where so many key foundations of our work is being tackled, that whether it's environmental or democracy protection, that legal defense is important. I would say it's also not just our regular legal work, but also core defense. And honestly, specifically for smaller groups, we are at a time where groups are at risk of being called terrorist organizations on the craziest basis, or having their C3 status attacked. And so there's some good coalition work happening now. And I think a movement approach of like, we're all in this together and need to stand up for each other. And a lot of organizations are spending a bunch of money to like be prepared for that. And so again, I'm naming the things that often donors don't want to fund. I mean, another one in that bucket is just core support, like leadership. And that's one of the things I really admire with Rachel's network and the Catalyst Awards is the willingness to just like support leaders and organizations. Because like this is a hard time to be an environmentalist, to be a leader, to be a woman leader, to be a citizen of this country or not a citizen of, I mean, there's just so much. And I think for donors to be thoughtful about that, and also how different communities are being impacted at different levels and different ways, and having the attention to that and looking at where money normally goes. So I think Rachel's network is a community that is really thinking about that. And I think it matters. Narrative and communication is important now. And also I mentioned before, resiliency, adaptation, and the political elections matter. We need to, some folks don't want to give political money. You can give more than you think you can, even with C3, to influence political outcomes. That's my list.
Well, I'll piggyback
Great list.
right onto that and just say I am seeing momentum and opportunity right now in the landscape. I think if our electoral system's integrity holds in November, it's going to be a really good election for Democrats, frankly, and those who care about clean energy. So my off the cuff answer is twofold. One, I would give to groups who are fighting to withhold the integrity of our electoral system, like both of my colleagues here, but also groups like the League of Women Voters. They were the lead name on the lawsuit against the Trump administration's blatant attacks on mail-in voting. ACLU is also doing amazing work. Brennan Center for Justice is doing amazing work, specifically partnering with states to defend the integrity of our electoral system. So if it holds, I think we're going to be back on offense very soon. I think we're going to see state houses flip. I think we're going to have trifectas. I think we could even take the federal Senate. So all building momentum to be truly back on offense in 2028. And I would pair with Lauren's answer on grassroots too, because critically important for continuing the power and the momentum of our movement, funding those groups that map out not just the North Star vision, but also the specific steps we can take to get there to make those policies a reality. So just throw a little nod towards groups like Evergreen, again, that work we are only as powerful as the movement in which we're in. So I'd pair it with grassroots work, but the policy development as well and the specifics. And hand it to you, Candace.
Yeah, I'm piggyback off of everything that both of you just said. I think for advocates, engaging on that state and local level, right? Because that's where a lot of the decisions that impact our daily lives are made, right? And so we've been seeing that in this moment, one example is that fossil fuel industry groups have been using AI to flood regulatory proceeding comments. They're generating these comments that are fake people or like using other people's names for people who hadn't actually submitted comments. And it's really swaying our decision makers, right? We know that these powerful interests have money, right? But our side has the people power. And so we need people to be mobilizing and participating in these rulemakings and to be engaging at our state capitals, right? And calling our legislators because it really makes a difference. And when, we have a federal government that is not favorable to these issues, we see, like we saw during Trump 1, that states and localities are going to be the leaders on these issues, right? I think for funding, our frontline partners who are like on the ground and who are the experts on these issues, right? Because they live closest to the problem. So they also are closest to the solution. And we can't win unless they are able to engage in this really meaningful work. And we know that a lot of environmental grant making goes towards some of the bigger organizations that have revenues of $20 million and over, right? And less than, I think, 4% of grant dollars in 2023 went to organizations that had a revenue of $1 million or less. And so I think that it's really important that we're funding these orgs and also that we're giving them general support grants too, because those are highly coveted and really important for them to be able to sustain the fight.
All excellent points. Thank you all. So I want to turn quickly, if I may, to some of the questions that have come up in the chat. And so I'm going to go ahead and follow up on as many of these as we can, but please feel free to answer as comprehensively as you need to. So, okay. This one gets this is a good question. How do you get around the issues with siting and permitting reforms for clean energy without taking away important protections for environmental justice communities and conservation movements? I'm just going to open it up to whoever wants to jump in on that one first.
Well, I will offer a couple of thoughts. One, studies have been shown that permitting and siting often moves faster when community engagement happens more robustly and sooner. And so that's a principle of involving the communities, listening to those who are on the ground and most directly impacted by the facilities sooner. And that requires adequately staffed and funded agencies to be able to do that. And so two components of that is just setting that principle out that listening to folks actually isn't going to slow this down. It may speed it up in a lot of cases, and agencies need the money to be able to do that. And I would also throw out there that as we are, looking at a burning planet, I think we should be organizing our communities to be in support of clean energy, which they almost, overwhelmingly are. And we're seeing local siting and permitting laws that invite community voices in being weaponized by the other side, who are bringing in other voices to stand up opposition that isn't truly a valid representation of the communities too. So it's a very complex issue, but I think it's one where we need to be bold and brave and out there with solutions that are both going to listen to communities and advance clean energy as fast as we know we need to ultimately save lives and save our planet.
Yeah, I think Lena really nailed the most important part. Like the early engagement at the community level is a win-win. I mean, that does end up in better projects and it can speed the projects. And that's a lot of what we're asking for in these. It's also something where the Biden administration, like there were efforts that were going to be put in place, and some of those were about education, communication, and the resources to do this work. And so what's being pushed through now, it's tricky for us in this moment because things are being lifted up that we know will be cynically used. And so part of it is there is a challenge of sort of who is holding the power. And so we know right now that there is an agenda to support more fossil fuels and against renewable energy. And so some of this decision making at the federal level is informed by that. That's not to say there isn't really important work that can be done to do community level work and to make sure that we're focused on the key protections, but how to speed up the processes. And some of that is just better resourcing and more intentionality about how that works. Also noting that a lot of the decision making is, state and local, and looking at how there's lots of room for process improvement. That's going to be a benefit for all. So we do have good examples on how to do that. And yeah, Greenlight is a good example of a group that's a great partner that's doing great work on that.
Nothing to add from me.
Okay, let me ask. I had another question popping into my own mind, but let me ask the one that's here. Okay, the elephant in the room. We've all touched on it. All of you have touched on it, which is the data center explosions that's happening. It's actually global, but it certainly is a national issue, and many states are really struggling in the face of this. So there's the question in the chat is, recognizing that AI is not going away, is it possible to energize data centers with renewables? Now, let me just for the record frame that energy use and the choice of energy is not the only environmental impact of data centers. There's water, there's air quality related to all sorts of things. There's just the land use. But let's just focus for the moment on the energy side of the equation. And the question is it possible to energize data centers with renewables?
Absolutely. It's 100% possible. There are low-hanging fruit solutions. Like if we start with this premise that we were going to power all of these data centers, which I think is a huge assumption that we should absolutely be engaged in pushing back on. Even if you are, not that we are, but even if when we're pro data center, we should be pushing back on these because a lot of these proposals are not going to come to fruition and very much should therefore not come with gas plants that will stick around, even if the data centers don't come to fruition. So we should be pushing back on that ghost load that's being proposed and being used as an excuse to build a whole bunch of fossil fuels. But even if you wanted to power all of them, it is absolutely doable with low-hanging fruit solutions on both energy efficiency and renewable energy. So you all have probably heard Jiggershaw out there everywhere talking about grid utilization. Like our current grid right now is only used at about 50%. There is 50% slack capacity on our grid, where if we just got a little bit smarter about how we guide our utilities to make investments, we could incentivize things like virtual power plants that can help homeowners have power in their homes, batteries, solar, increasing efficiency to better utilize the existing capacity that's on our grid right now. And that could go a huge way and would make improvements that would be good for all of us, whether or not those data centers come to pass. And those kinds of things should be first and foremost what we are pushing at the front as demand is skyrocketing, basically due to data centers at this point. And then there are many other developments that we can make in terms of renewable energy at the both utility scale and the distributed scale that could go a long way to powering data centers. Absolutely.
And I'll add really quickly that in addition to the power plants, there's also that instead of using clean battery storage, which is an option, many of these data centers will also rely on dirty diesel generators for backup power. And so that's obviously creating additional toxic air pollution in addition to the gas plant reliance. And so we also have opportunities to rely on renewable energy there.
And I'll just say quickly, the advocacy is like, there is so much energy, you can even see it in the chat here, to fight data centers. And it's an opportunity for us right now to organize ourselves to be focused and strategic in what we're asking for. Because right now, many of the asks that have made their way to like the state legislative level are just around whether or not these data centers are going to get billions in free taxpayer incentives. That's bonkers. Like the Virginia state budget is held up right now mostly because they're arguing over whether or not to continue the tax incentives that are drawing those data centers to Data Center Alley in Virginia. And like, of course, if they're going to get free taxpayer money, there should be requirements put on them that they, for instance, comply with the state's clean energy laws. But I think they should go much further than that and demand that these companies that say they're willing to pay anything to get their quote speed to power should have to build with clean energy because it's not only doable, but it's better for all of us. It's even better for them. It's faster, it's cheaper, like we talked about, and it will also lower emissions. And so making those requirements hard and fast and across the board are what I think our community should be laser focused on, and not just whether or not their billions of dollars in free money comes with some strings attached.
Good point. Okay, I'm going to move to our last question. Lauren, sorry, Lauren, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just put in the chat, Sierra Club's been putting out guidelines on data
Right.
centers, focusing on protecting customers, clean energy, fair rules for tech, and protect public health. The only other thing I'd note is an overarching thing. I agree with everything that's been said, but an overarching thing is we're also at risk of federal government preempting states. So we've been doing a lot of this work on setting up state guidelines, but I think in this election, that is something we need to be paying attention to. There is going to be some real money coming into these elections from PACs backed by OpenAI and Palantir that are going to try and undermine candidates and move decision making to the federal level. So a real risk we need to have our eyes on.
Okay, I personally cannot thank the three of you enough for this informative conversation, and I know I speak for everybody who is here today. I have two requests that I want to make of all of you. The first is to thank you for your leadership in advancing these solutions and the work you're doing every day. I want to encourage everyone who's listening to support these women and their leadership and the organizations that they work for so that they can continue to do this work for all of us. And let me ask our last question. As all of you know, at Rachel's Network, we care a lot about care and making sure that women leaders have the support that they need. So, what are each of you doing right now to take care of yourselves during a very difficult time? Who wants to go first?
I can. So I'm, they say touch grass. I'm doing that literally. During law school, the firm that I worked at my second summer, they did like a volunteer day and they took us to the Presidio where we helped repot plants for the nursery. And I found that touching soil really takes the edge off of a lot of this. And so I'm planning a big garden project right now, and it's good for the soul.
It is good for the soul. Thank you. That's me too. Lauren, Lena.
Sure. Think of two things. One is hanging out with amazing women. Honestly, like it does make a difference. My daughter, who's in her 20s, like sort of jokes about my coven, and there are people here that I consider part of my coven, and like it mattered. Like we're making great progress, but also like in the environmental movement, like our three groups are among the few that actually have like female executive directors. We saw a lot of women sort of in deputy positions, but we're still, needing to see more leaders. And that to me is a big part of what Rachel's Network supporting women leaders, it's Catalyst awardees, its membership and other women in the space. It matters a lot. And then, yeah, I do literally hug trees. Or I'll just like go and like put my hand on a tree and just like get that. And I recommend Plum Village is an app I use that's a mindfulness thing, and it matters. Christiana Figueres is doing work on with them and others on just mindfulness, and with an aim to look at the climate community and how hard this work is. And so giving people sort of space and resources to ground ourselves and keep going. So I guess those three. Sorry.
I love all
All
of
right,
that.
take us away, Lena.
Well, those are all so beautiful, and I definitely find advocacy the best antidote to apathy, and I feel so privileged and lucky to get to do this for work. I find so much joy in seeing our voices make a difference and impacting decision makers. I also go camping. I just got back from a week-long camping trip with my family outside in the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico at the Cosmic Campground, where my 2-year-old and 5-year-old got to see the Milky Way in the middle of the night. And being away from my cell phone for 4 whole days was both terrifying and also wonderful. It just totally reinvigorated me. My kids played in a stream for hours at a time with no screens and no yelling or hitting. So we're planning more camping trips. And then I would also highly recommend heavy weightlifting. I love CrossFit too. That's my other place of joy. I just encourage all my girlfriends to lean into their strength and get really strong, and then also go use that outside with their coven. Love it, Lauren.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you all. We're going to ask everybody to turn on your cameras if you're in the audience. This is your opportunity to say thank you. You can go off, open up your audio. Please join me in thanking